Hi Gavin, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to ask you, I heard a story about your piece Jesus Blood, and you were recording it and you left the tape playing the piece without ending. Coming back to the studio, you saw people listening to it very carefully, some of them crying to it.
Yes.
So I'm asking, what's the power of music then?
I find that the voice alone is very powerful, and it has a really strong emotional quality, especially if you repeat the phrase over and over again. And I felt that if I was repeating it for a fairly long time, it would be very nice to give some quiet support for the voice, not just the voice alone. So that's why I started to add an accompaniment. And the idea of the accompaniment is always to increase the feeling for the voice. So never do I write the accompaniment to show what a clever composer I am, what beautiful orchestrations. It's always to give the praise to this beautiful voice, this very noble and wonderful old man's voice, and this is the only thing that we know of him. We know nothing about him, not what it looks like, not his name, nothing. The only thing that remains of this poor old man is this 26 seconds of music. So I wanted to, in a way, put him into the everlasting life, in a way.
How did you get into your passion for music?
Very slowly. I lived in a very small town where everything was done by amateurs for each other. There was no concerts, visits to the town. So I learned to play the piano, and I played the piano in the church. My uncle was an organist in the church, so it's really just a small town, people making music together. And I listened to the radio a lot, and I became very interested in jazz. And so eventually I became a jazz player, but I first started playing the double bass when I was 18, because in the small town where I lived, there was no double bass. So I didn't see a double bass until I was 18 years old. And then I started to play. And then after that, I got more and more into jazz, into improvised music.
Why did you choose the bass as your preferred instrument?
My mother is a cellist, so I love low strings, and my dad was a bass singer. So I love the low sounds, but I'd always wanted to play the bass, but there wasn't one in my town. But when I listened to music, I would always listen to the bass line. I would never listen to the tune or the words, I would just listen to the bass and the harmonies. So for me, the bass was the most interesting sound, and I got to know the sounds of all jazz bass players. I would listen to basses in orchestras and listen to what they were doing, and just see how powerful that fundamental is. And if you take that away, then suddenly everything falls apart. The bass is a complete anchor of everything. It's a great, powerful sound.
You played with other creative and original people like Derek Bailey, Tony Oxley, for example. Which were the main characteristics of that experience with them?
Well, I learnt a lot by playing with both of them. They were older than me, but they were great improvisers. And I learnt very quickly, and we became a very tight trio. I learnt a lot about improvising. I learnt a lot about harmonic thinking before we started to play freely. Once we started to play freely, then there was a kind of trust between us. And so we had this kind of mutual respect for each other. And it was a very powerful feeling to be in this situation with the three of us together. And it was very difficult. If somebody else came to play with us, it was almost impossible. So it was like a kind of a very tight family. And I learned so much from them, from improvising. And then eventually I stopped improvising, but when I was with them, it was very important to me.
How did you build your composing interests and skills?
The skills come much later. The interest was initially from people. I was interested in people like Cage and American composers. And I listened to Cage. I bought music by Cage and Christian Wolff, Morton Feldman. And eventually I met Cage and worked with Cage in America. And so I was working in that sort of experimental way, along with other friends in London, in England, where there was a kind of community of experimental musicians who were not part of the mainstream, who were not part of the establishment. They were very kind of independent and rather crazy. And I worked in that way for a long time, and every time anyone suggested a project, I would always say yes. And one day I was asked to write an opera, and I said yes, even though I'd only seen one opera in my life. I'd never written anything for orchestra, nothing for the human voice, nothing for the stage. The opera was going to be in ancient Greek, which I don't understand. It was to be commissioned by the La Fenice, one of the big opera houses in the world, and I had 8 months to write it. And I said yes, and I did it, even though it was cancelled. And then eventually it was done. But I learned composing by the act of composing. So I learned how to write an opera, not by studying at a university or a conservatoire, but by actually writing. And then working with the musicians. And what I always felt, each time I worked with musicians, I would always listen to what they tell me, because a musician knows far more about his instrument than a composer does, or about his voice. And a composer can be sometimes very arrogant and think they can tell people what to do. They will tell them what to do in the sense of giving them music, but the people themselves, they know the subtleties of technique, of what works well for their instrument or their voice. So each time I would do something, I would listen to what they said. If they maybe said something a little bit critical, said, you know, this violin thing is very nice, but if you put the fingers that way around, it's the same harmony, but it's easier for the hands. So I think about their hands. For a percussionist, I think he has to play the bells there, then he has to go to play the marimba there. How does he get from there to there, and how does he put the sticks down there, pick them up there? So I think about his movement. And then the percussionist will realise, I'm not just writing music, I'm thinking of him as a person, of what his life is as he's doing it. So you develop a kind of social sympathy, and if they think the composer is on their side, you're more likely to get good results. So I learned technically just by writing more and more, and eventually I didn't have any music study lessons at all, so I didn't go to conservatory or anything like that. Eventually I would say that now I have complete confidence in my technique, but now my life is nearly finished, so it's very funny, you know, in a way. Most people have confidence in their technique when they're maybe 28 or 30. Me, maybe by the time I was 50 or so, but it's okay, it's okay.
It's okay, anyhow.
I plan to live till I'm 150.
Do you recognize some of the people you worked with as your master?
Never as master, there always were colleagues or friends or people I worked with who were not... They had an effect on me, and I learned a lot from them, but I would say I always felt as being equals rather than master and pupil. You know.
You took part of a certain musical environment in which there were a sort of community, you told us, and spirit of sharing among composers. In the 70s, Stevie Reich, Michael Nyman, Cornelius Cardew, and others, so-called minimalistic composers. And was it meaningful, helpful, this kind of experience? Did you experience anything like that since that period?
I have since, yes, but at that time, what I've experienced since is more working with performers than with fellow composers. There, it was a friendship between composers. When I met Philip Glass and Steve Reich for the first time in 1970, they were just beginning. They played concerts in London where there were maybe 6 people in the hall. And at that time they were in each other's groups, which is unthinkable now. And so we were all kind of struggling, we were all underground in a way. And so there was a sympathy between the Americans and us, and some Europeans too. But then later I have less contact with composers and more with performers, because after I wrote my first opera, I became better known, because if you write an opera your name is in the newspaper. That happens. But I was lucky that I was asked to work with I was commissioned by 2 very important quartets. One was the Arditi Quartet for a string quartet, and they were the best at the time, and also the Hilliard Ensemble for voices, and they were certainly the best in terms of voice. So I learnt a lot by being with them. That really speeded up my understanding.
And you worked also for dance and theater. And which kind of cultural experience has been for you to be involved in other artistic projects too?
Well, I always, you see, as I say, I always said yes to every project. So quite a lot of that time, that means collaborating with people who are not musicians. And I enjoy very much with dance, with choreography, because every choreographer wants different things. They have different kind of demands. Or if I'm working, say, in theatre and I'm producing music for a stage play, then I am second to that. In an opera, it's a collaboration with the librettist, and then that's and a stage director, so there's a very wide range of things to deal with, and all those things are sharing. You have to deal with some other person's mind. And quite a lot of the time in the early days I was teaching in a fine art college, so I would spend a lot of time with visual artists, and of course they think very differently from musicians. They think about ideas. If you talk with an artist, you talk about ideas, what they're doing and so on. You talk about musicians, you talk about money. You know, it's the different people. Artists are really interesting, and so I enjoy that. And then you're taken away from this thing of it's too easy to be a composer, just writing lots of music and sending it out, but to be in the real world with real people, which is one reason why I play with my ensemble, because that's important, that the public sees who it is. It's not just an orchestra and a conductor and I'm not there. I'm here, I'm playing, you know.
I think it's much better.
I agree. And it's also now my family start to play with me. My daughter is playing with me today. My other 3 children play with me on my ensemble. So it's great. So this is like a kind of an extended family.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.